For 20 years of marriage, I took care of Nolan's aging and sickly parents, scrimping and saving on every expense. Yet, while doing the laundry for my mother-in-law, I found a receipt from a 5-star hotel. When I went to the city to confront Nolan, I discovered that not only was my husband an executive at a public company, but he also had a beautiful wife and an adorable son. My husband's parents knew about this too, only I had been kept in the dark, working tirelessly for our family all these years. Not until I saw Nolan surrounded by a group of people, emerging from that towering skyscraper, and then bending to get into a black sedan, did I believe that the Nolan president the receptionist was talking about was the same man as my husband. Ma'am, is there anything else I can do for you? The receptionist pulled me abruptly back to reality. I hastily said, "No, nothing," and then hurriedly hailed a taxi at the door. In the past, I would never have been so extravagant as to take a taxi, but now, the shock of Nolan president being my husband was too much. I just wanted to figure out what was going on. "Follow that black sedan," I told the driver. The driver glanced at it and exclaimed, "Whoa, a Maybach, that's a luxury car." A Maybach. A look of bewilderment flashed across my eyes as I subconsciously asked, "Is it very expensive?" The driver replied casually, "Of course, it must cost at least a few million." I couldn't help but clutch my bag tightly. It was a 20 yuan street stall purchase that I had carried for 4 or 5 years. Even though I was very careful with it, the bag was starting to peel. Yet, my husband was driving $1 million luxury car that I had never even heard of. "What, do you know the owner of that car?" My voice was hoarse as I replied, "Yes, he's my husband." The driver glanced at me from the rearview mirror and said in surprise, "Your husband?" "Just kidding," I said. The driver laughed dryly. "You're quite the joker." I blinked my sore eyes. I wished I was joking too. That black Maybach eventually drove into a high-end villa area. The taxi couldn't get in, so the driver dropped me off at the gate. I could only go to the security guard at the gate. I tried to explain to them over and over again. "Nolan is my husband. I came to the city specifically to find him." But the security guard on duty looked me up and down disdainfully, and then shooed me away. "Get lost, you crazy woman. We know Nolan's wife. She's young and beautiful. How can you compare to a crazy woman like you?" I was unexpectedly pushed down, and my elbow and knee were both scraped. But I didn't care about that. It was because of what they said. Nolan's wife. Besides me, who else could be Nolan's wife? As I was in a daze, I saw the security guard who had pushed me put on a smiling face and bowed deeply to a young woman holding a child, greeting her, "Mrs. Nolan, I just saw your husband's car come back. Are you two going out again?" The woman looked to be only in her 30s, with a slender figure and delicate makeup on her face. Hearing this, she had a gentle smile on her face. "Yes, my husband made a reservation at the Binjiang Pavilion, and he's taking us mother and son out for dinner." "Binjiang Pavilion? That place is hard to book. You have to wait in line for a month." "Mr. Nolan is so thoughtful." The woman had a look of undisguised happiness. As she spoke, I saw that $1 million car slowly approaching. The driver's window rolled down, revealing a face I knew all too well. It was Nolan. I was being held up by the security guard and dragged to the side to make way for them. When the car had driven away, the security guard sneered, "See, that's Nolan's wife." I was numb all over, and my expression was vacant. It turned out that my husband was not only the manager of a listed company, but he had already started a new family outside. There were no long-distance buses home that night. I spent the night in a cramped 30 yuan motel, nibbling on a 50-cent bun, and my husband and his new wife were dining at a restaurant that required a month's advance reservation. I looked at the cold bun in my hand. All my years of hard work had been a joke. Early the next morning, I was awakened by my phone ringing. It was Nolan calling. Everything that happened yesterday felt like a dream. I picked up the phone in a daze, and Nolan's familiar scolding came through the receiver. "Quinn, where did you go? You left Mom and Dad alone at home. Do you know how much they've been looking for you all day? You can't even do this little thing right. How can I feel at ease working outside?" I had heard similar words countless times. Before, after hearing this, I would feel guilty. thinking that Nolan was working hard outside. So no matter what difficulties or grievances I encountered, I would rather grit my teeth and swallow them than bother him with these trivial matters. I looked at the damp, peeling walls of the motel and suddenly felt so tired. What had I been holding on to for all these years? Seeing that I wasn't saying anything, Nolan became impatient. "Quinn, are you listening to me?" I thought about the reason I came to the city to find Nolan. If I hadn't found that hotel receipt in my mother-in-law's pocket while doing the laundry, I might never have known that my husband had another family outside. I swallowed and moistened my dry throat and said, "There's no more money at home. Isn't 2,000 yuan a month enough?" Nolan questioned and accused me. "I heard from your mom that you buy a new piece of clothing every 2 or 3 days. How old are you? Can't you stop buying all those useless things? Do you think my money is blown by the wind? You don't know how to cherish anything." I clutched the quilt under me tightly, and suddenly I didn't want to put up with it anymore, and blurted out, "Buy a new piece of clothing every 2 or 3 days. Nolan, do you know that I haven't bought a new piece of clothing in 2 or 3 years? And I only bought a new pair of pants for 30 yuan when my old ones were completely worn out? You give me 2,000 yuan a month, which also includes your parents' medical expenses. And after deducting that, there's only 1,200 left every month, 1,200 to support 3 people. And your dad also needs to eat meat and drink every day. Do you know that I want to split $1 in half to spend?" My eyes were getting wet, and my voice was getting louder. "Nolan, you don't know anything. Why are you blaming me?" 2. This was the first time in over 20 years that I'd vented my frustrations to him. Nolan was stunned, silent for a moment before hurriedly throwing out a sentence. "All right, I'll give you an extra $1,000 each month. Just go home quickly and don't worry your parents. I've still got things to do here. I'll hang up first." Before hanging up, I heard a faint female voice from the other end. "Brother Nolan, do you think this bag looks good? It's only 300,000. I clutched my phone, my heart filled with sadness. Nolan could spend 300,000 on a bag for his mistress, but he would haggle with me over $2,000 in living expenses. It was ridiculous. I gathered my emotions and bought a ticket home. Before I even entered the house, I heard my mother-in-law complaining to the neighbor. "This daughter-in-law of mine is wild, running around all day, leaving me and the old man alone at home. She has no conscience." I pushed the door open directly. When the neighbor saw me come back, she looked embarrassed and said, "Well, I still have some work to finish at home, so I'll be going now." When the person left, my mother-in-law glanced at me sideways and said sarcastically, "Oh, you're finally back. Weren't you out looking for wild men behind my son's back?" I don't know how she had the face to say that. I changed my usual meek personality and said calmly, "Mom, if you insist on putting a green hat on your son, then there's nothing I can do." In the past, my mother-in-law would secretly and openly splash dirty water on me and squeeze me, and I never retaliated. After suffering for so many years, I didn't want to endure it anymore. My mother-in-law's face changed, and she slapped the table hard, incredulously saying, "How dare you talk to me like that?" My father-in-law was woken up and shouted angrily, "What are you shouting about?" My mother-in-law's momentum immediately died down. I dragged my things and turned back to the room, ignoring my mother-in-law's fierce glare. It's called a room, but it's actually the original firewood room that was converted, except that there was an extra bed added. After Nolan left home, my mother-in-law disliked my father-in-law's snoring, so she took over the bedroom that Nolan and I originally shared. The firewood room was stuffy and dusty, and I developed a cough soon after moving in. I complained to Nolan, but he said, "It's just a room. Let your mom live in it if she wants to. She's old. You can't let her sleep in the firewood room, can you?" I had no choice but to move in, and I've been living here for over 20 years. I sat on the bed in a daze, looking at the narrow and simple room, and then thinking about the neighborhood where Nolan and his mistress lived. I didn't see what it looked like inside, but judging from the outside alone, it was an independent villa with a small garden and fountain in front, and there was even strict control over the people entering and leaving. My phone dinged. I picked it up and found that Nolan had transferred 1,000 yuan to me. I clicked to receive it, and then transferred it all to another separate bank card. I don't want to be a sucker anymore. I'm going to get everything Nolan owes me back. 3. It wasn't even dinner time, and my in-laws were already complaining about being hungry. I took out the winter melon and cabbage I had bought the day before and quickly stir-fried 2 dishes. As soon as I put the food on the table, my father-in-law slammed his chopsticks down in dissatisfaction. What kind of food is this? Is it even edible? My mother-in-law followed suit, scolding, "You're just putting on a show for us now that my son's not here, aren't you?" I served myself a bowl of rice expressionlessly and sat down. This is all the money can buy. Eat it if you want. Frankly, I wasn't surprised by their reaction. After eating in fancy restaurants with Nolan, they naturally looked down on my simple home-cooked meals. My unusual attitude angered them. My father-in-law reached out and overturned the table. I quickly grabbed the dishes and rice, narrowly avoiding disaster. "You!" My father-in-law's face turned red with anger, but I remained calm. "Since you don't want to eat, then I'll clean up. I've been busy all day and I'm tired. I want to rest early." Without waiting for their response, I took the food away. After eating myself, I cleaned up the dishes and went back to my room to rest. In the middle of the night, I heard rustling noises outside. The firewood room was connected to the kitchen, so I quietly opened a crack and saw my in-laws rummaging around in the kitchen. I sneered. Unfortunately, I was no longer the Quinn who used to worry about them not eating and damaging their health, and would save food in the kitchen. The old couple went hungry all night, but they still refused to yield the next morning. I ate as usual and then put the dishes away, and only washed my own clothes. In the end, a basket full of dirty clothes piled up, and the 2 of them couldn't even take a shower, and they smelled terrible. My mother-in-law originally wanted to tell people about my bad behavior, but as soon as she approached, they covered their noses and avoided her, leaving her blushing and returning home in embarrassment. After only a week, they couldn't take it anymore. They were clamoring for Nolan to come back, and I was waiting for this day. The day Nolan came back, my mother-in-law was sitting on a bench at the door early in the morning, and when she saw me, she looked smug. "Look at me, your son is back. How am I going to deal with you?" I walked past her coldly. Nolan returned in a small car. It wasn't the Maybach from last time, but a Volkswagen I was familiar with. I couldn't help but sneer inwardly. This man really loves to act. As soon as he got out of the car, my mother-in-law threw herself at him crying, "Son, you're finally back. Your mother was almost bullied to death by that bitch." 4. She cried and pounded Nolan's shoulder with her fists. This scene attracted quite a few onlookers from the village. Seeing more and more people gathering, Nolan frowned. "Mom, let's go inside and talk." He helped his elderly mother home step by step, looking like a dutiful son. I heard many people in the village saying, "Old Maxwell's son is so filial. He came back as soon as he heard something was wrong at home. And he's so successful too. Look, he even bought a car. It's a pity he only has a daughter. His family line will be cut off." I ignored them, straightened my back, and closed the door in front of everyone. So what if I gave birth to a daughter? After learning the truth that had been hidden from me for so many years, I had been confused. It was Riley who called me and said, "Mom, get a divorce. I'll help you find a lawyer. Don't be afraid. I'll always be your support." Riley had always been an excellent student and was directly admitted to the best law school. Her tuition was fully waived. Before she left, she told me, "Mom, when I start working, I'll definitely give you a good life." I said, "Okay," with tears in my eyes. But no matter how excellent Riley was, she couldn't match the importance of a son carrying on the family line in Nolan's heart. Inside the house, Nolan helped his mother sit down and then looked at me with a frown. "Quinn, your parents said you didn't give them anything to eat. What's going on?" I lowered my head. "I did, but your parents were picky and didn't want to eat." My mother-in-law rolled her eyes and cried, "Son, you don't know. She only gives us green leafy vegetables to eat every day, not even a bit of meat. Your dad and I are not rabbits." Nolan was annoyed by his mother's nagging, but he still patiently coaxed her, and then said to me, "What your parents said makes sense. Elderly people are in poor health, and they need a balanced diet." Nolan said with a matter-of-fact tone, You should put in more effort. Isn't that what a daughter-in-law should do? I curled my lips and finally looked up at the man. He was wearing a very ordinary shirt, but years of pampering had made him look 10 years younger than me. This husband of mine, whom I had been married to for 20 years, felt so unfamiliar. Nolan, I said calmly, let's get a divorce. 5. Divorce? Do you know what you're saying? Before Nolan could speak, my mother-in-law shouted, I knew it. You're up to no good, you little bitch. You disappeared for a whole day last time. Where did you go to meet some wild man? Is there any justice in this world? My son works himself to death outside, and you're enjoying yourself at home and still not satisfied. My heart ached with anger. I'm up to no good? I'm enjoying myself. All these years, who has taken care of everything in this house? The laundry, the cooking, taking care of you. In the dead of winter, you told your dad you wanted to eat live fish, so I ran to the market in the middle of the night. My hands cracked from the cold, and I had a high fever the next day, but still had to get up and work. Am I enjoying myself? Is that how people enjoy themselves? As I spoke, tears welled up in my eyes. Nolan and I were both college students from the village. My grades were even better than Nolan's back then, but the village was poor and could only afford to send one person to university. It was Nolan who held my hand and promised me solemnly that he would treat me well. That's why I chose to give up my chance to go to university and went to work in the city instead, to allow Nolan to focus on his studies without worrying about tuition fees. I worked 3 jobs a day, and even when I was sick, I dared not go to the hospital. But what did I get in the end? I took a deep breath, wiped the tears from the corner of my eyes, and stared straight at Nolan. I took the divorce agreement out of my bag. Nolan, if you still have a conscience, sign this. The man frowned and didn't even look at the agreement in my hand. Quinn, what are you doing? You're not afraid of being laughed at by the villagers if you get divorced at your age? All you want is money, so you have to make such a scene? He took a bank card out of his pocket. There's $15,000 in here. It's enough for your living expenses for the next 3 months. Your monthly allowance will be increased to $5,000. Don't make a fuss. I don't have that much time. What? $5,000 a month? Is the food she cooks made of gold? My mother-in-law shouted and tried to grab the card, but my father-in-law stopped her. All right, Quinn has taken care of us for so many years, it's not easy. What's wrong with giving her $5,000 a month? My father-in-law turned to me and said in an unusually kind tone, Quinn, your mother-in-law has been too much. I'll watch her in the future. You and Nolan have been married for so many years, and it's not a good thing to get divorced at our age. It will become a laughingstock of our old Maxwell family. 6. I looked at my father-in-law expressionlessly. I've heard this countless times. Nolan, just like him, would always come out and say nice things whenever my mother-in-law and I had a conflict. But when my mother-in-law bullied me again the next time, he would disappear again. In the past, I was soft-hearted and thought things would get better. Now I realize that they were just playing good cop, bad cop, trapping me here for half my life. I didn't take the card but coldly said, if you don't sign, I'll go to court. Nolan looked at me as if I had said something funny. Go to court? You? Quinn, have you been watching too many dramas lately and learned how to be a great female lead? You should think about it. Those great female leads have education and background. What do you have? Without me, you probably can't even afford to eat. I looked at his arrogant expression and turned to a certain page of the divorce agreement. Please read the contents of the agreement carefully before you talk to me. Nolan grabbed the document and frowned. A moment later, he screamed, Quinn, are you crazy? You want half of the property in the divorce agreement? My mother-in-law was about to scratch my face. Okay, I knew this bitch was up to no good. So it turns out she's after our family's money. I grabbed her hand. As someone who worked hard every day, my strength was no match for an elderly woman who had been pampered all her life. When my mother-in-law saw that her hand was firmly grasped by me, her expression changed, but her mouth was still dirty. Let go of me. Son, look at the good wife you found. She even dares to hit your mother-in-law now. Nolan didn't expect me to make a move, and his face turned ugly instantly. Quinn, what are you doing? Do you still have any sense of being a wife? I glanced at him coldly and threw my mother-in-law's arm aside. I've been the daughter-in-law of the Maxwell family for most of my life, and that's enough. Sign the divorce agreement, and we'll have nothing more to do with each other. My mother-in-law screamed in pain. Son, divorce her. We don't want such a venomous woman in the Maxwell family. Nolan looked at me. Perhaps knowing that I was determined, he said coldly, we can get a divorce, but you also know our family's situation. Your parents still need to live in this house. Can you really bear to let your parents suffer on the streets? My father-in-law also took the opportunity to play the victim. Nolan's wife, I know you have resentment, but this is the place where your old mother-in-law and I live. Can you really bear to do this? I shook my head. I don't want this house. Who cares about this broken house? Nolan thought that his words had moved me and choked up. Quinn, I knew you were the kindest. You wouldn't bear to let your parents be homeless and exposed to the wind and sun. People are kind and are bullied by others. It's because I was too kind in the first half of my life that I was deceived and kept in the dark by these shameless people. But not anymore. I smiled slightly and said, I don't want this house. I want the 2 properties that Nolan owns in the city. 7. Nolan's fake smile froze completely when he heard that. What private property? Where do I have any private property? He frowned. I give all the money I earn every month to you. How could I have any private property? He was still stubborn, but Nolan didn't know that in just 1 week, the private detective my daughter had contacted for me had found out that he not only had a luxury car, but also 2 houses under his name. One of them was the mansion I had visited. The total assets of these alone were estimated to be over $2 million. Yet Nolan didn't even want to leave me an old house. 20 years of marriage, how ridiculous. I sneered, really? Then you must be going to someone else's house. As I spoke, I threw the photos in my hand at the man. There were photos of Nolan and that woman. Mansions, luxury cars. They were living a very luxurious life. Nolan, after all these years, I didn't even know you had another wife and child. I smiled and gradually I started to cry. Nolan, I've worked hard for you for 20 years. And this is the result? Tell me, do you have a conscience? Nolan's expression froze when he saw the pile of photos. He seemed to realize at that moment that I knew the truth. Quinn, listen to me. There's nothing else to say. See you at the Civil Affairs Bureau on Friday. If you have any objections, we'll just go to court. Seeing that I was unmoved, Nolan got a little annoyed. Even if you go to court for a divorce, do you think you can win? Don't talk about anything else. Do you have the money to hire a lawyer? I sneered. Nolan, your mind is all on your mistress and illegitimate child. Of course you don't know how excellent our daughter is now. But I was too lazy to argue with him and turned to leave. My mother-in-law chased after me and cursed, but I didn't care. For so many years, everyone in the neighborhood knew what kind of person I was. My mother-in-law was mean and loved to take advantage of others. And everyone knew who was right and who was wrong. They were just too lazy to say anything. 8. After leaving the old Maxwell house, I found a job in the city. Over the years, because of my mother-in-law's picky nature, I not only became quick and clean at doing things, but I also developed excellent cooking skills. The hotel owner appreciated me very much and skipped my probation period after only 3 days. He even offered me a salary of 10,000 yuan a month. I thought back to my time at the old Maxwell house, when Nolan gave me 3,000 yuan a month, and I had to be both a cook and a nanny, and that 3,000 yuan still had to cover my living expenses. I was even worse off than cheap labor. My daughter called me and asked if I wanted to come live with her. I refused. My daughter had just started dating someone this year, and I didn't want to trouble her. I just told her to be careful when dating, and to never be fooled by a man's words. My daughter laughed and said, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll always remember what you taught me." My daughter has always been very smart and sensible. Perhaps because Nolan was always absent from her childhood, she had a natural aversion to the opposite sex. So when I first found out that my daughter had a boyfriend, I was a little surprised. When Nolan didn't go to the Civil Affairs Bureau at the scheduled time, I knew he wanted to sue. But what I didn't expect was that Nolan's mistress appeared in front of me before the court summons. 9. Nice to meet you, I'm Scarlett, she said. She looked the same as ever with exquisite makeup, black stockings, and a cheapao. You must be Nolan's wife from the countryside. Scarlett smiled. Technically, I should call you sister-in-law. Stop, I interrupted, pulling out a chair and sitting down. I don't have a younger brother, and I certainly don't have a sister-in-law like you. Don't disgust me. The smile on Scarlett's lips froze for a moment, but it soon returned to normal as she looked down at me condescendingly. I heard you asked Nolan for a divorce. She sipped her tea lightly. It seems like that little receipt wasn't in vain. I narrowed my eyes. So the hotel receipt in my mother-in-law's clothes wasn't accidentally left there? Scarlett said calmly. For over 20 years, I've given Nolan a son and been with him through thick and thin. Why should you continue to occupy the position of Nolan's wife? Nolan hasn't wanted to make you his official wife for 20 years, and he wants me to file for divorce first. It seems that Nolan's love for you is also worth considering. The woman's expression froze for a moment. I watched as the tips of her fingers clutching the teacup turned white. After a while, she returned to her usual elegant appearance. Since you've already filed for divorce, just be decisive and don't cling to Nolan anymore. I will spend the rest of my life with Nolan. I stood up. Then please hurry up and have him sign the papers, so we don't have to go to court. There's still a 30-day cooling-off period. But you've been waiting for so many years, you shouldn't mind waiting another month. I smiled slightly, ignoring Scarlett's out-of-control expression, and turned to leave. Just as I was about to take out my keys to open the door, Nolan suddenly rushed out of the hallway, startling me. Quinn. I frowned. Have you signed the papers? Nolan looked a little helpless and tried to grab me, but I dodged him. His hands fell empty, hanging limply. Quinn, we've been married for 20 years. Are you really going to give up like this? I interrupted him. First of all, it's not me who gave up. It's you who cheated on me. It's you who betrayed our marriage first. Nolan, do you remember what you said when we got married? You said you would cherish me and love me forever. And be honest with me. But which part of that did you do? After we got married, I did the laundry, cooked for you, gave birth to your children, and took care of your parents. What did I get? You had a son with another woman, and you started another family outside. 20 years, Nolan. You've deceived me for 20 years. If I hadn't found out, would you have wanted to deceive me for the rest of my life? I forced back the bitterness in my eyes. Nolan, see you in court. 10. I know Nolan isn't truly sorry. He's just afraid I'll take half his assets. After all, his affair is a fact. I've consulted a lawyer, and if I go to court, I can definitely get half of the property. Maybe even more than half. On the day of the court hearing, my daughter came too. She personally represented me in court. Nolan turned green with anger when he saw her. Tara, you're actually suing your own father. Do you have any shame? My daughter scoffed. Stop it, my name is Riley, not Tara. Do I even have a father? How come I've never seen you in all these years? My mother-in-law and father-in-law followed Nolan. She's such a little bitch, an ungrateful white-eyed wolf. She ate and drank from our family, and now that she's grown up, she's still against us. She has no conscience. My daughter was expressionless. Every bite I ate was saved for me by my mom. What does it have to do with you? Besides beating and scolding me, and resenting me for not being a boy, what else have you done? Scarlett was holding Nolan's arm. Don't be angry, Nolan. We have Lennox, and Lennox will take care of you in the future. Nolan immediately calmed down. My mother-in-law hugged her beloved grandson. That's right, I have my grandson. Why do I need you, a worthless burden? My daughter didn't bother arguing with them, and walked in with my arm around her. After the court opened, my daughter single-handedly debated with a group of lawyers. She silenced Nolan's lawyer. In the end, the judge ruled that I would get 60% of the couple's shared property. The extra 10% was compensation for the years I had taken care of Nolan. After leaving the court, I felt refreshed. My daughter hugged me and said, Mom, congratulations, you're finally free. I smiled. I wish us both happiness in the future. Later, I heard from a familiar neighbor about Nolan. As soon as we finished the divorce and got the divorce certificate, Nolan quickly went to get a marriage license with Scarlett. But less than half a year later, the two of them were arguing again. Scarlett and your mother-in-law are fighting every day, and I heard that the police have been called several times. With all the domestic unrest, Nolan had no time to work. Soon, he made a mistake in handling a big company deal and was fired. When he got home, Nolan blamed everything on Scarlett. The two of them had a fight, and somehow it was discovered that Lennox was not Nolan's child, but Scarlett and someone else's love child. Their lives are miserable now. Your mother-in-law was still saying how good you were in the village a few days ago. I laughed. She's not my mother-in-law anymore. Those days are over. I'm going to move forward.